There's a viral claim in real estate retirement content that gets repeated across countless videos and almost never gets the actual math attached to it. The claim is that you only need one property to retire. The claim is technically true under three very specific configurations, and almost entirely false under the configuration most viewers picture when they hear it. Here's the test. If your mental model of one property to retire on is a standard single-family home and a moderate cost market generating around $2,500 a month in gross rent, the actual math reduces that gross figure by roughly half before any of it touches your retirement plan. So your $2,500 a month rental does not produce $30,000 a year in retirement income. It produces closer to $15,000. Today I'm going to walk you through where the other $15,000 goes, why a recent change in interest rates made 2026 a meaningfully worse year to start this plan than 2015 was, and the free configurations that actually do produce a retirement on a single property. I'm Tom. This channel is about real personal finance for normal people. The kind that actually works instead of the kind that sells you a course. No motivational fluff, no fantasy returns, just what the math actually does over time. If that's what you're here for, hit subscribe. Today, the actual cash flow math on a standard rental property in 2026. Why the current 30-year mortgage rate of 6.52% matters more than most people realize. The three configurations that genuinely retire people on a single property, and a couple named Carl and Linda who quietly built one of those configurations starting in 1998 with a duplex in the suburbs of Pittsburgh. Let me start with Mike, because Mike's story is the version of this dream most viewers will recognize. Mike was an accountant in suburban Indianapolis. In 2015, he bought a 3-bedroom rental house for $250,000, put 20% down, financed the rest at 4% on a 30-year mortgage. The rental brought in $1,900 a month gross. Mike's plan? The same plan a million people have, was to hold this property for the next 25 years, let the mortgage get paid down by the tenant, and retire at 65 on the income. The first 8 years told him something different. His monthly mortgage payment of $955, plus property taxes of $250, plus insurance of $100, plus a maintenance reserve of $208, plus a vacancy reserve of $100, came to about $1,600 a month in actual cost. Against $1,900 in gross rent, that left him roughly $300 a month in positive cash flow. $300 a month is $3,600 a year. Mike was effectively building a retirement asset that produced less in annual income than the interest on a money market account. And that was before anything went wrong. In year 8, things went wrong. The HVAC system failed in February of 2023, $18,000 for a complete replacement. The tenant who had moved in 2 years earlier missed rent in May, then missed it again in June, then disappeared. Mike spent 2 months in eviction proceedings and another 2 months finding a new tenant. 4 months of lost rent and $1,900 a month was $7,600. Add the legal fees and the repainting and the carpet replacement and the new dishwasher the previous tenant had managed to destroy. Mike's bad year was roughly $25,000 in negative cash flow, which wiped out about 7 years of accumulated positive flow. What Mike actually built over 8 years was equity, not income. He paid down approximately $50,000 of his loan principal. His house appreciated by roughly $45,000 over the period, so his net wealth from this property grew by about $95,000 over 8 years, which sounds substantial until you realize that's $12,000 a year of equity gain, none of which he can spend without selling the house. Equity is wealth. Equity is not retirement income. Mike is 62 today. He's still working. The rental is still there. It will likely produce more meaningful cash flow once the mortgage is fully paid off in about 17 more years, when Mike will be 79. Mike's plan worked, but not on the timeline he thought it would, and not for the kind of retirement he was picturing. Mike's bad year is not unique. It's actually statistically average. Real estate professionals have a rule of thumb called the 50% rule, which says that operating expenses on a rental property, excluding the mortgage payment, average roughly half of gross rent over the long run. Half. Not 5%, not 15%, not 25%. Half. If your gross rent is $24,000 a year, your operating costs over a decade-long period will average around $12,000 a year. The reason the 50% rule is so stubborn is that real estate has a cost structure most people underestimate. Annual property taxes run roughly 1 to 2% of the property's value every year forever. Insurance is $1,500 to $3,000 a year and rising fast in markets exposed to wildfire, hurricanes, or flood risk. Routine maintenance averages around 1% of the property's value, but it lumps badly. You can go 5 years spending almost nothing, and then 1 year replace the roof, the water heater, and the HVAC system in succession. Vacancy averages 4 to 6% of annual rent, but the bad year produces 3 months of vacancy in a single block, which feels much worse than the average suggests. Property management, if you hire it, runs 8 to 12% of monthly rent for long-term rentals and 25 to 40% for short-term ones. Total these honestly across a decade and a half of gross rent figure isn't pessimistic, it's the realistic baseline. The version of the math that produces a single property retirement is the version where one of those line items, almost always the mortgage line, has been eliminated entirely by paying the property off. Everything in the configurations I'm about to walk you through is some structural version of solving for that one specific thing. Now layer in something specific that changed in the last year. Mike got his mortgage in 2015 at roughly 4%. A buyer doing the same transaction today, a $250,000 house with 20% down, would be financing the remaining $200,000 at 6.5%, which is the Freddie Mac average for the week ending June 11, 2026. The monthly principal and interest payment on the same loan jumps from $955 to $1,267. That's $312 more per month in mortgage cost. Mike's $300 positive cash flow, the slim margin that made his original plan technically viable, becomes negative $12 in 2026, negative $12 before any maintenance, before any vacancy, before the year the HVAC fails. The current rate environment by itself eliminated the margin that made the standard mortgage rental approach work at all. A single-family rental bought today with a 30-year mortgage is mostly a wealth-building strategy with a 30-year time horizon, not a retirement income strategy with a shorter one. People who didn't run this math before signing the loan documents are about to learn it the same way Mike learned it, with worse numbers. So if the standard mortgage rental path doesn't deliver retirement income, how do some people actually pull off a single property retirement? There are 3 configurations that work, and Carl and Linda built the first one. Before I get to them though, there's a 4th configuration I have to address. Because it's been on every other YouTube video about this topic for the past 5 years, and it doesn't quite work at current rates. The pitch goes like this: buy a primary residence in your 20s or 30s. Wait 15 or 20 years for it to appreciate. Refinance or open a home equity line to pull $200,000 of accumulated equity out of the property. Take that $200,000 and invest it in dividend stocks or another property earning 7%. Pocket $14,000 a year in income that the property generated for you while you slept. Repeat in 5 years. In 2018, when this approach went viral, the math actually worked. Home equity lines were averaging around 5%. Market returns on a diversified mix were running around 7%. And the spread between borrowing cost and investment yield was a real 2-point margin. On $200,000 of borrowed equity, that came out to roughly $4,000 a year of positive carry, before taxes and before any bad market year. In June of 2026, the home equity line of credit national average sits between 7 and 7.5%. According to recent Kirinos and Bankrate survey data, a homeowner running the same play today is borrowing at roughly 7.25% and investing for the same 7%. Expected return: the spread that used to favor them has gone to 0 or slightly negative. On a $200,000 interest-only HELOC at 7.25%, that's $14,500 a year in interest against $14,000 in projected investment income. Negative $500 annually before tax, before fees, before the first market correction. If the line is amortized over 20 years instead of interest only, the gap widens to roughly $5,000 a year of negative cash flow. The play that delivered $4,000 of positive carry in 2018 produces $5,000 of negative carry in 2026. Same strategy, different rate environment. The videos still recommending this approach were filmed when the math worked and have not been updated since. If you have already executed this play and you're carrying the line right now, the question becomes whether to unwind it on your schedule. If you haven't, the math says, wait, the viral version isn't one of the 3 configurations that work, it's the one that used to. Configuration 1. The paid-off multi-unit. Carl spent 40 years as a plumber in the suburbs of Pittsburgh. Linda taught 4th grade in the same school district for 31 years. In 1998, when Carl was 39 and Linda was 37, they bought a 2-unit duplex for $180,000 on a 20-year mortgage. They moved into the larger of the 2 units, the smaller one, 2 bedrooms and a galley kitchen. They rented out. The rent from the smaller unit, plus a portion of Carl's plumbing income, covered the entire mortgage payment plus operating costs. Carl did all the plumbing work on the building himself, obviously, and most of the basic maintenance. Linda handled the books and the tenant relationships. In 2018, 20 years after they bought it, they made the final mortgage payment. Carl was 59. They owned a fully paid off duplex with a fully paid off life ahead of it. Today, in 2026, Carl is 67 and Linda is 65. They still live in the larger unit. They rent the smaller one now for $1,400 a month to a steady tenant who has been there 4 years. Their actual numbers, which Linda walked me through over coffee, look like this. The rent brings in $16,800 a year in gross. Property taxes are about $3,000. Insurance is $1,500. Maintenance averages $2,000 a year because Carl still does most of it himself. Vacancy reserves of about $700. Net annual rental income, about $9,600. On top of that, their combined Social Security is around $42,000 a year. Carl has a modest retirement account of about $150,000, which generates roughly $6,000 a year at a 4% withdrawal rate. Total annual cash income, about $58,000. Here's the part the spreadsheet doesn't show, the part that makes their math actually work. They aren't paying rent. They live in the other unit of their own building. If they were renting an equivalent 2-bedroom in their neighborhood, that would cost them another $1,400 a month, or $16,800 a year. So their effective income, in lifestyle terms, is closer to $75,000 a year, on a $50,000 a year spending budget. They're comfortable. They travel modestly. They help their adult kids occasionally. Carl's skills keep the maintenance line low. Linda's organization keeps the tenancy stable. Carl and Linda built a single property retirement and it works. But notice the specific configuration. The property is fully paid off. It generates 2 income streams from one address, since the owners are also the occupants. The owner-occupant arrangement converts a housing cost into a non-expense. Carl has trade skills that match the maintenance requirements, and their local market has stayed stable rather than swinging through booms and busts. Every one of these conditions is a specific structural choice, and removing any one of them weakens the math significantly. That's Configuration 1. Configuration 2 is the version of single property retirement that sounds the most glamorous and is by far the most management intensive. Think a cabin in Asheville, a beach condo in Destin, a ski rental in Park City. The economics are very different from a long-term rental. A successful short-term rental in a working destination market generates gross revenue of $50,000 to $100,000 a year on a property that would rent for $25,000 a year on a long-term lease. The premium is real, and the premium pays for solving most of the math problems we walk through with Mike's rental. The trade-off is also real. A short-term rental is a business with a property attached, not an investment with a property attached. The unit has to be cleaned between every guest, which costs $40 to $60 per turnover if you hire it out, or your unpaid labor if you don't. Property management for short-term rentals runs 25 to 40% of gross revenue for full service, which substantially eats into the premium. Insurance runs higher than on a regular rental because of liability exposure. Maintenance costs are higher because the property gets turned over 50 to 100 times a year instead of once every couple of years. And the regulatory environment around short-term rentals has tightened in many destination cities over the past 3 years, with several major markets restricting or banning new permits outright. The Airbnb listing that works today may not be a legal Airbnb listing in 3 years if the city council changes hands. Several of the largest US short-term rental markets, including New York City, have effectively banned non-owner occupied short-term rentals over the past few years. Owners who bought purely for the Airbnb economics in those cities have had to convert to long-term rentals at a fraction of the income, sell at a loss, or relocate the strategy to permitted secondary markets. The regulatory risk is not theoretical. It is the single largest variable in the configuration 2 math. And most people considering this path price it at zero because pricing it correctly would require admitting that the cash flow model depends on an annual political vote in the host city. The average Airbnb host in the United States earns somewhere between $14,000 and $16,000 a year in gross revenue, according to platform data through 2025. That's the average. It's also useless for retirement planning purposes. The retirement funding short-term rental is the one in the right location, in a market with stable regulation, run by an owner who treats it as a part-time business and puts in 10 to 15 hours a week. That property nets $35,000 to $50,000 of clean retirement income against a much lower asset base than a long-term rental would require for similar income. The wrong property in the wrong market produces something closer to a long-term rental's economics with more headaches. The gap between these outcomes is research, location, and skill, not capital. Configuration 3 is the one most people don't think of as one property to retire on, but it's mathematically the cleanest, the lowest risk, and the single most common path to single property retirement in America. Configuration 3 is selling your primary residence in a high-cost area, buying something modest in a low-cost area, and investing the spread. Take a couple in San Francisco who paid $400,000 for their home 25 years ago. The home is now worth $1.5 million. They sell. Selling costs at 6% take $90,000 off the top. Section 121 of the tax code gives the married couple a $500,000 capital gains exclusion, leaving $600,000 in taxable long-term gain. Federal long-term capital gains tax at 15% is $90,000 more. State tax varies by state. Net proceeds roughly $1.32 million. They move to Boise or Knoxville or Greenville and buy a 3-bedroom home for $400,000 in cash. Cash extracted from the single property transaction, approximately $920,000, at a 4% safe withdrawal rate. That $920,000 produces about $37,000 a year of retirement income for the rest of their lives. Add the average combined Social Security benefit for a retired couple of roughly $40,000 a year, and they're looking at about $77,000 a year of retirement income from what was functionally a single property transaction. They don't have a tenant, an HVAC repair bill, a vacancy month, a regulatory risk, or a property manager taking 30% off the top. The property did all the work by being in the right place at the right time and being held long enough for appreciation to do what appreciation does in coastal metropolitan markets over 20 plus years. The other side of this configuration is willingness to move, which is the real cost. Some people can. Some people can't. The math is identical either way. 3 configurations. Each one technically produces a single property retirement. None of them is the standard mortgage single-family rental that most viewers picture when they hear the phrase. What every successful version has in common is something the viral content rarely names. It's a specific kind of skill, a specific kind of patience, or a specific kind of geographic flexibility. Carl and Linda put in 20 years of disciplined ownership, while Carl handled the maintenance himself. The successful short-term rental owner runs a small business attached to a property. The primary residence converter held a home in an appreciating market for 2 or 3 decades and was willing to move to a different state when the time came. None of these paths is passive. None of them happens accidentally. They all require something specific in addition to capital, and that specific something is the thing the headline never mentions. Mike's mistake wasn't picking the wrong property or buying at the wrong time. Mike's mistake was running the wrong configuration for the outcome he wanted. He wanted retirement income on a 25-year timeline, and the math of a mortgage single-family rental doesn't deliver retirement income on that timeline. The same property held for 30 more years, fully paid off, would absolutely retire him. The way Carl and Linda's duplex retires them, But Mike doesn't have 30 more years, he has maybe 20 if he's lucky. If you're considering this path, here's a question to ask yourself before you ask anything else. Not can I afford a rental property, and not is real estate a good investment in 2026? The real question is which of the three configurations you're actually capable of executing. The answer is different for everyone. Some people have the patience and the trade skills for the paid-off multi-unit. Others have the entrepreneurial energy and the location flexibility for the high-yield short-term rental. Still others are sitting on a primary residence in a high-cost market and just need to be willing to move. And many people, when they run their numbers honestly, find that the right answer for them isn't a single property at all, but a portfolio of investments where one property plays a supporting role rather than carrying the whole plan. A small allocation to a low-cost REIT index fund gives you most of the diversification benefits of real estate exposure without any of the management headaches, the tenant calls, or the regulatory exposure. That's not the answer most people came looking for when they typed one property retire into a search bar. It's often the answer that fits their actual life better than the headline does. The headline says one property retires you. What the math actually says is that it can under specific configurations for people willing to do specific work. Math isn't the part you should be afraid of. What you should be afraid of is signing up for the wrong configuration and discovering, 15 years in, that you're holding a wealth-building tool when you needed an income-producing tool. Mike's house will eventually retire someone. It won't be Mike. Run your own math before you run anyone else's. If this helped clarify something, hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.